All right. Welcome back to class. Today is Wednesday, September 9th, and we are going to keep rolling through. Actually, we have reached our last day of content for this unit. Can you believe it? We are already here. We have finished the first unit already. Man, the time is flying. Time's flying by. I don't know if it's flying by for you, but it's flying by for me. And that's good because I cannot wait to get you guys back in this classroom again. And the faster the time flies, the faster that happens. So yesterday we did a little bit of a what if game. What if this happened? What if that happened? Monday we went over the Assyrian Empire, which was our third empire. Today we're going over our fourth and final ancient empire that we're going to cover for this unit, which is the Persian Empire. So we've covered Babylon, Egypt, the Assyrian Empire, and now the Persian Empire. So pull out that Google form page and we will get right to it. So go ahead and pull that up. I am going to cast this PowerPoint now. So right about now, you should be able to see the PowerPoint for the day. And we'll get started. Takes it a second to load, but that's all right. So today's going to be the last day of content. And what I mean by that is it's going to be the last day that we're giving new information for a test. The test is going to be on Friday, and tomorrow is a day for you guys to study. Now, if you have a Google Meet with me, we can study together, or you can watch a video tomorrow where I will give you some ideas on things that you might want to study. But other than that, tomorrow is your time. There will be a Google form, but that'll be one question. Just check it off, say that you studied, and you'll get your full 10 points for the day. Couldn't be easier than that. But for today, you have a Google form with some questions on it about the Persians. And in order to answer that, you're probably going to need to know about the Persians. So let's get started. So we start, as always, with our objectives. So these are the three questions that we want to be able to answer by the end of this lesson. If we can answer all three of these questions, we can feel like we actively participated and learned today. So if we can answer these three questions, and here they are. What different tactics did Persia use to control? And when we say different, we're going to be talking about different than the other empires we talked about. So Babylon created civilization and empires in general with vast groups of people all under common law. Egypt used agriculture from the Nile River. The Assyrians used their military. What did the Persians do? What did they do differently? What did they do the same as other people? How did the Persians create their empire? Explain the policy of earth and water. We're going to be going over that during this lesson. So you'll be able to explain the policy of earth and water. What did the Persian society, how did they differ from other ancient cultures? So not just the tactics that they used to control the people and conquer land, but how about society? How was society layered? Was there a hierarchy? Was there not? Why not? We're going to go over all that. If we can answer those three questions, then we can feel like we actively learned about the Persians today. So what I want you to do now is I want you to pause the video and I want you to think about this question. Think about it, come up with an answer. Take 30 seconds to just think about this question. So pause the video. If you wanted to control a country, would you use military or diplomacy? When we say military, would you try to conquer land and invade people, or would you use diplomacy, like making a deal with another country? Pause the video, think about that. So now I want you to think why. Why did you choose what you did? Why did you choose what you did? And now let's learn what the Persians did. So the Persian Empire, you should be able to see my mouse now. Remember, Egypt's down here, and the Assyrians are all throughout this area until the Persians come in the east. So out here, the Persians start, and then they're going to push west this way. Sorry. So they start over here, and then they slowly start to push this way toward the Assyrians who are here and toward Egypt, which is there. So how did they do it? They used lightly armored soldiers who were very fast with chariots rather than using very heavily armed soldiers that couldn't move as quickly, which is what the Assyrians had. They used overwhelming numbers. So they always had 10,000 soldiers, which is a large number, bigger than any other army could even comprehend at the time. And they kept them lightly armored, which kept it cheap to do and kept it quicker. The name of their soldiers, their highest class of soldiers, was called the Immortals. And they were called the Immortals because their army was so big that it would never die. And you felt like you would never die if you were in the army. It wasn't because they believed in an afterlife or immortality, or they believed that if you participated in the military, you would go to the afterlife. It wasn't because of any of that. It was just a name to signify that they would never die if they entered the army, because the army was so strong. So it's really more about their confidence in the army than any religious meaning. So these are a few ways that the Immortals have been broadcast or portrayed in Hollywood. On the left here, these are both from the movie 300, which is about Spartan Empire, Spartans, Romans, who battled the Persians later, way after Persia had been around for a long time. And they battled. This is the Hollywood interpretation. I think this guy in the bottom left in the movie, he was like 9 feet tall. These guys were basically unkillable. They were super skilled. That's not really true. It was just a large army. That's all it was. That's what the Immortals were. They weren't actually immortal. They were just soldiers. So let's go over the land that the Persians conquered. They went with the you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar sort of strategy. And so now we're going to talk about that earth and water that we went over and what that means. So they didn't really conquer and rule with an iron fist like the Assyrians did. So when we asked that question at the beginning, would you rather conquer with military or with diplomacy, the Assyrians went with the military. The Persians are going to go with diplomacy. They're going to make trades and deals and conquer land that way. We're going to trade you this, but in exchange, we want this chunk of land. And that's how the Persians are going to acquire their land, and they're going to move very quickly. And also, persuasion. They have 10,000 soldiers at any time, so if they really want your land and they offer you a trade, you're inclined to take it, because if you don't take it, you know that they're going to beat you in a battle and they'll just take it anyway. So they always offered trades, not always, but in most cases, they offered a deal to the land that they wanted or the empire that owned that land. And most likely it would be accepted. They would take the land diplomatically, and now it's theirs rather than having to fight for it. They're very mild, and they allowed their subjects to keep local, which means that every town had their own traditions, their own laws, their own religion, their own language, and sometimes their own leaders. They all did their own thing. Instead of where you had the Assyrians who had absolute monarchy, an absolute king, instead, and remember when we say absolute, that means that they only answer to one person, and that's God. And they don't have to answer to anybody else. They don't have to share their power with anybody else. Instead of that, it's more so provinces, and we'll talk about provinces here in a couple slides. Provinces, which is what we would refer to them as states. So it's like Kentucky being able to make their own laws about different things, and Tennessee can make their laws, and Illinois can make their laws, and Virginia can make theirs. It's kind of the same thing. Now, the federal government, as we know, can still overrule us, and they can still make their laws that everybody has to follow, and the same went for the Persians. But for the most part, they tried to keep laws local. So a little bit more about the government. It was a monarchy, and it was viewed as a sacred institution. So again, it was tied to religion. But the monarchs were treated like royalty. They were treated very, very well, very sacred, and that's not uncommon for the period. But the luxury that surrounded the monarchy, so the gold and the riches and the jewelry, all of that, which we've come to know throughout history. When we think of a king, you think of a gold crown, rings, jewelry, whatever. That is new. That is new to the Persians. The Persians are the first ones who are going to really be doing that. So they had an imperial government, which means that they kept acquiring new land. They always wanted to acquire new land. And they were able to keep up with it because when they acquired new land, instead of that land now still having to be ruled by the same one person, it would just become a new province, or it would go under a new province. And the provinces were ruled by 3 officials. And they all got to keep each other in check. So like we talked about with Egypt, there was that separation of power. That's still happening here in Persia. It didn't happen with the Assyrians, but it's happening with Persia. There's still a separation of power. So it's ruled by 3 officials, and they all get to keep each other in check. So one official can't just decide that he wants to do something completely different. They all keep each other in check and make sure they're all somewhat on the same page. So let's talk about Persian society. The fathers dominated the household. Their word was the law. Fathers were in charge of the household. If you went against your father, it was a crime. Children were often raised by slaves because fathers didn't have time and mothers didn't have time. Remember, during this time, the Egyptians are the first ones to incorporate women into society and give them a role in society, but the Persians also kind of adopt that. And I think it's important to know, and we haven't talked about this, and you won't need to know this for the test, so if you want to skip through the next 60 seconds, you're more than willing, or more than welcome. But the earliest civilizations of man, the earliest that we don't even have names for, were matriarchal societies, meaning everything went through the mother instead of through the father. The mother was the head of the household. She made all of the decisions for the household. The bloodline ran through the mother, and the mother was the provider of the family. And it's a complete 180 to when we get actual historic documents and names and societies, because when we were hunter-gatherer cultures, they were matriarchal societies, and when we transition into civilization, we go into a patriarchal society, which is what I'm describing now, which is the father dominates the household. And that's actually a new idea with civilization. Pre-civilization, it was a matriarchal society. Post-civilization, or during civilization, I guess I shouldn't say post-civilization, but once humanity becomes civilized, they become a patriarchal society. So let's talk about the Persian legacy. So this is things that the Persian Empire is remembered for. The Persians invented coinage. They were the first ones to use coins as currency, so you can buy things, sell things, and then use the money to buy other things. They improved infrastructure. They built a royal road. They improved travel time by 80%. So they were the first ones to say, hey, we have a lot of chariots around here. Maybe we should make a road to make it easier to get around. They created a government system able to effectively govern a large empire. Like we talked about, the provinces. So instead of the king having to make decisions for everybody, now there's provinces and different people in charge of the provinces. And then the treatment of the monarchs was definitely adopted by the West. So we're talking about West Europe and North America, how we treat monarchs, definitely adopted by us. Give them a crown, give them jewelry, bow to them, kiss their feet, whatever. That's all Persian stuff that Western culture adopted. So let's talk about the Persian decline. The Persians are going to be around for a very long time until Alexander the Great, and you should remember him because when we get into the Middle Ages, he's going to be important to remember. But later leaders in the Persian Empire, they just didn't have the leadership necessary to rule a large kingdom. And the problem with that is they were not called governors, but they were essentially governors of their province. And they become sort of like monarchies within, or they become like kings to their province. And the overarching Persian king has to be stronger than them. So you have to be stronger than the leaders of all 20 provinces. And as you get more provinces, now you have to be even stronger and stronger and stronger to show that you are still the king. And as the empire grows, you just don't have the leadership necessary to show that you are stronger than all of the leaders of the provinces combined. And that's really what's going to lead to the fall of the Persian Empire, kind of similar to the fall of the Assyrians. They did too much too fast. The Persians, they could have done all of that if they had had the right leadership, but it was a tricky situation. And when they didn't have the right leadership, Alexander the Great, who we will talk about when we get to the Middle Ages, he's going to recognize that, and he's going to attack, and he's going to put an end to the Persian Empire. So let's take a look back. These were the questions that we wanted to answer. These were our objectives for the day. What different tactics did Persia use to control? So they had very different tactics. So instead of a small sea-based army, they used a large army with a lot of people, and they had mild rulers instead of harsh rulers like the Assyrians did. Explain the policy of earth and water. So the offering of earth and water, we didn't really talk about this a whole lot. And you don't need to know the policy of earth and water specifically. So it is interesting to know, and if you would like me to go over it, please mention it in one of our Google Meets. But for the time that we have today, and because we're in a condensed schedule, the time that we have allotted to us for the school year isn't really going to matter. Essentially, you mix up some dirt and some water, you give it to the Persian army, and that's how you surrender. But there's a whole lot more to it, and it's very interesting. So if you want to know more, you can set up a meeting with me for office hours, or you can set up, or you can ask about it in a Google Meet. Our last question: how did Persian society differ from other ancient cultures? So we talked about they were able to control a large army because they used provinces. They invented coinage. They invented roads. And another thing that I kind of glossed over a little bit is that merchants are kind of over glorified in earlier societies. Merchants, they're just traders. They just trade things that other people have made and grown. And for some reason, merchants had a great place in society with the Assyrians and in Babylon and with Egypt. And the Persians just say, why are we so fond of merchants? They're just trading the things that we made for them. So the Persians put them in a lower spot in society, which was not common. So that's going to be it for today, you guys. We are all done with content. So make sure you get that Google form filled out and submitted. Remember, everything is due Sunday night. You can do the Google form after you watch the video, during. You can do it Sunday night if you want to, though I don't recommend it. If you want to meet with me during my office hours, remember those are 1:15 in the afternoon until 3 o'clock in the afternoon every day. So if you want to set up a meeting with me, just email me. We can get that done. First period and fifth period, remember we meet Monday and Wednesday. Next week, so we meet today because it's Wednesday. We meet today, and second period, fourth period, sixth period, we will meet tomorrow to do a review for the test. So make sure you tune in for that. Tomorrow, if you cannot tune in for the Google Meet, or you don't want to tune in for the Google Meet because you want to study on your own, you are perfectly able to do so. Just make sure that you fill out the Google form that asks you whether or not you studied. Check off yes, and you will be all set. But I will post another video reminding you of that tomorrow. And if you don't have any questions, then you are all good to go. All right. That is going to do it. I will see you, Wildcats.